Yarlung Records began because the recording industry collapsed. This is now almost 18 years ago. But if you think back, record labels were closing every week, and musicians were losing their ability to share what they do with audiences who couldn't hear them live. And this was a problem for a lot of young musicians coming up through the conservatories, beginning their international careers, and having no CD or vinyl record that they could sign for audiences. So it began because I started out just as an audio junkie, and I wanted to make recordings of the most difficult instruments I could think of. The first, and still most difficult, is the piano. We also recorded clarinet fairly early on, also impossible to record well, but we did a good job. And after some of these initial recordings, the first one was with David Fung, an Australian pianist who was the first piano conservatory student at Colburn School after the conservatory opened for full tuition for its first 4-year program. I heard David play in a concert, and I reached out to him afterward. I said, "Mr. Fung, I heard your concert the other night. Would you like to make a recording?" I didn't tell him anything more than that because there was no Yarlung Records. He said, "Yes. What do you have in mind?" So I thought, okay, here's my Get My Feet Wet project. This is the one Elliot and I listened to here at Acoustic Image, our first recording, when we realized we needed to make certain improvements along the lines. So David played a spectacular program, and we had a finished product. And then I thought, this is good enough to share with the world. We should find a way to work with a record label and release this. So I talked to my friend René Goiffon at Harmonia Mundi, thinking, I love the label. Why don't they release it for us? René said, "Bob, there may be no record labels in a few years. You're hiking up a very steep cliff." I said, "I know, but that's not new. What should we do?" He said, "I don't know what to tell you. Distribution is falling apart. We may not have distribution in a couple of years. Talk to my wife. Rabina knows how this business works." So she and I had lunch. We started talking about microphone techniques and recording and producing. And Rabina Young is one of my all-time favorite producers in classical music. She's just fantastic and a good friend to this day. She took me under her wing. So we realized we're not getting anywhere with the people who already know and like what we do. So why not start a record label? What do we have to lose? Nothing. So we did. This recording, David's first album, got into the hands of Sir Brian McMaster, who was running the Edinburgh Festival. And even though it was not as good as David's second recording, it was good enough that Brian hired David to make his debut the following season in Queen's Hall at the Edinburgh Festival. That caught my attention. In other words, what we were doing was not simply audio trivia or playing with microphones. It was actually important in our musicians' careers. So the mission developed because of that, because of David's success. When many years later, Petteri Ivonen was playing the Sibelius violin concerto touring with the Lahti Symphony Orchestra in Japan, he had fans come up to him at the Tokyo Opera House and up in Hokkaido who had his vinyl LP that they had bought because they were fans of Yarlung's and fans of his. He'd never been in the country before, so he felt like he was playing for a fan base that already knew him and loved him. That means a lot, and that is what has driven our mission from that early David Fung recording that turned out for him to be so successful. So Brenda Barnes summoned me to a lunch meeting. Brenda Barnes was president of KUSC at the time, our classical music station in Southern California. And she said, "Bob, we need to support you. What can I do to help?" I told her I'd think about it. So the next day, I called her back and I said, "Brenda, I figured out what we need to do. Because these are expensive to make well and because they don't sell millions of copies, we need to form a nonprofit." She said, "Okay, and I want you to be our first president." She said, "Okay." Wasn't ever sure how much help she had really intended at the beginning of this lunch meeting. But she wound up serving as our first president for about 5 years of Yarlung Artist Life and got us up to a fantastic start. So that is what has enabled us to move forward and keep recording new material and work with musicians at the beginning of their international concert careers. Yarlung, from the IRS perspective, has two principal missions. First, we want to commission and record new works of music from living composers, obviously, composers who will get a wider audience because of our distribution around the world. Secondly, we like to support young musicians at the beginning of their international concert careers, where having a CD or a stream or whatever on TikTok will help them build their audiences for the future and help them encourage repeat audiences when they come back. It's enabling musicians to sign a CD at a table after a concert and meet the audience in person that they otherwise might not do. So these small things may not save the world as the recording industry continues to coalesce and shrink in some ways, but it does help some musicians get a leg up where it really matters. Yes, Yarlung is an audiophile label. And yes, we pride ourselves in the highest resolution we can come up with, be it DSD 256 or high resolution PCM or analog tape, which is basically unlimited bandwidth, or vinyl, which can sound like unlimited bandwidth when it's done well. However, many people today find musicians and listen to musicians based on MP3s that they hear through earbuds on an iPhone or an iPad, or iPod, if those still exist. And the truth is that when you start out with a really clear audiophile quality product, it makes a better MP3 as well. So the more effort we can put into the high-res version to make it clean and clear and present and living, the better the compressed stream or MP3 will sound to people as well. So it's worth it for those people, as not just the high-end audio listeners. People sometimes ask me, what is Yarlung Records? It's actually, Yarlung is a community. We have a nonprofit called Yarlung Artists that raises money to support musicians at the beginning of their careers and commission music and do recordings like we've just done with the Takacs Quartet, Julian Labro, and Takacs Assad. But also, we have a record label, that's Yarlung Records. And while there's the non-profit on one side, Yarlung Records is the no-profit. It's hard to make a profit when you put so much energy and funds into creating something that won't sell a lot of copies, but it's worth it. And thanks to the two of those organizations, they work well together. Yarlung is a board of directors that supports us, that guides us. It's special advisors who help us with all kinds of musical technical questions and vet musicians who come to us out of the blue asking to record from Italy or China or wherever they're from. Mika Sasaki, for example, who recorded Obsidian with us, a great recording focusing a lot on the music by Clara Schumann. She was a pianist who worked with Petri Ivonen. He referred her to us and said, Bob, Mika is someone who has a message to share with the musical world. And we did. We have a close working relationship with Merging Technologies that built our DSD and high-res PCM recorder. We have an immediate connection with Sonorous Audio, who built our tape deck. Elliot Midwood and Acoustic Image I've already mentioned. But in addition, we work very closely with Steve Hoffman, who has been guiding our mastering concept since the very beginning, mastering such that we don't need to do it after the fact. That's the hope. And Bernie Grumman, who cuts the lacquers for our vinyl pressings. And Kevin Gray, who worked with us originally in the early years for digital putting together and formatting in gold masters. We also have close partnerships with RTI, the vinyl pressing plant in Camarillo, and Palace in Germany, who's been pressing most of our vinyl recently. And our distribution network around the world is extraordinary, and we couldn't do it without all of these people working so hard on our musicians' behalf. I'm grateful. One of the side benefits to being an audiophile record label is that some people tend to find our recordings sound pretty good. And what that means is that often when a concert hall opens for the very first time, a Yarlung album can support their visibility around the world. We did the first recording, for example, at Segerstrom Center's Samueli Theater. We did the first recording in Walt Disney Concert Hall. We did the first recording at the Broad Stage in Santa Monica. And then, of course, Camilleri Hall. We did the first recordings for Camilleri Hall at the Brain and Creativity Institute at USC, where we've done our jazz recordings and the one for Nigel Armstrong. These recordings help put these concert halls in the map. And we have feedback from articles and from people asking questions from Europe or Asia about these concert halls and recording spaces. So it's something that, while it's hard to book them and get into them, it's something nice that we can give back to the concert halls in appreciation for their hosting us for these recording sessions. I was always hoping that since I knew Ray Irani, we could get Occidental Petroleum to underwrite one of our vinyl LPs because, of course, vinyl comes from oil. PVC is a product from the petroleum industry, and we'd like to do something that's actually positive for the petroleum product that we use so much for our vinyl pressings. Ray was never interested, unfortunately, but we haven't lost hope. Maybe BP or something down the road. But there is an interesting story about vinyl and about the vinyl making process that has been of particular interest these last few years. After Russia invaded Ukraine and the boycott hit, all of the nickel that Palace, our German vinyl pressing plant, ordered had come from Russia. So they were cut off midstream. So we had to wait 2 years to get enough nickel to make the test pressings, let alone the full pressing, for some of our more recent vinyl releases. Patrick Trustle, our executive producer for the album Women, War, and Peace, is a go-getter. He's a corporate attorney with contracts all over the world. Helped me source nickel for Palace in Germany, and we actually found some for them in Australia and in Canada, which helped. It felt good to be able to do something nice for Palace that had done its utmost to press vinyl for us before. And we look forward to, hopefully, many happy years of vinyl. As long as the vinyl audiophile and young people record craze lasts, we shall produce it. Sometimes we get lucky, and the first lacquer that Bernie cuts works. The test pressing sounds good. Petr Ivonen's Partita in D minor, the Bach Partita, was the first pressing. So was Chanson, Jim Mullally's project that is featuring Sasha Cook singing Poème de l'amour et de la mer with Coburn Orchestra, with Yehuda Gilad. Those were the first lacquers that we cut. Sasha's earlier album, No More Difficult, If You Love for Beauty, took 5 lacquers. That was remarkable. None of them were good enough, and one never knows why. Lacquers are soft materials. The process is analog, it's organic, it's almost living, we can think of it that way. So they are individual people before they get metal plated. The first Smoke and Mirrors album, one of our greatest, also took 5 cuts at the lacquers. One of those was Bernie's and my fault. We cut it at 33 instead of 45, but we fixed that. The second one, Earth and Wood, the first set of lacquers on one side were great. The second lacquer on the other side was great. So we got lucky. One never knows. One just has to be patient and keep listening until one is satisfied.